In 2022, the government is trying really hard to persuade you to ditch your petrol car, your diesel car, in favor of getting something with a battery inside, like the battery inside the camera I'm looking into, or your iPad or your iPhone or laptop or whatever. But should you? I don't know. To do that, I want to explore and talk about some real-world concerns, some real-world benefits, and some myths about BEVs. And to do that, I need an EV, which I have right here, the Kona Electric, which I borrowed again. So why do we choose the Kona EV? Well, it's the EV that I've spent the most time in. In fact, I think, including my review of it the first time around, I've spent close to 2 weeks with this Kona EV and that other Kona EV combined. And it's because it's also like the most mainstream EV. It's one of the most mainstream B segment, normal looking cars you could find that also is an EV. And just look at it. It's adorable. So the Kona EV. Just to bring you guys up to speed again, this is a car that is offered by Hyundai. It's basically a car that is perfect for any first-time EV buyer. I'll tell you why, because it's literally a B7 SUV. They sell this car with an engine, okay? They sell multiple versions of this car with different engines. So when they hollowed out the floor, stuffed in as much batteries as it could take, and basically made it into an EV, and it's so unassuming. That's why I like it so much. Even inside here, it feels to drive, to sit in, to touch, and experience like a normal car that doesn't have an engine. It's starting at 149,000 ringgit. That's for the E-Lite, the base model, okay? And that comes with a 39.5 kilowatt hour battery. And that won't get you that far. That'll do like 300 kilometers on a single charge for a full charge. And that's a little worrying. It'll give you anxiety and to charge more often. But the one I'm driving here is the E-Max with the biggest 64 kilowatt hour battery. So every EV from 2022 will exclude excise duty, import duty, and you don't have to pay road tax for until 2025, which is pretty great. So that's quite a lot of incentive to buy an EV, right? But what about range? Because in this, fine, I wouldn't have to worry about range so much because for me at least, it goes over a certain point that I'm comfortable with my routine and how often I can charge this car. Because with 484 kilometers of range on a full charge, I don't have to worry that much. But certain EVs don't have that much range. And that's the point I want to make. The sticking point that people will get hung up about with EVs versus cars, normal cars with an engine, is range. So let's talk about range. EVs, like it or not, they run on lithium-ion batteries these days. So that's the most cutting-edge technology for batteries that we can actually mass produce in large volumes. So yeah, that's what they run on. There will be advances in the future, but right now, this is where we're at. So you're paying mostly for the battery, which is also a concept that is quite foreign to people. When you buy a car, I guess most of the cost goes to, the metal, just the construction of it, but without the powertrain like you usually have with a car. The battery in the EV is the most important part and the most expensive part of any electric vehicle. In fact, it's the most expensive, the largest and the heaviest thing in any EV. So yeah, and also range is tied to battery size, which is tied to price. Also a concept very foreign to any car buyer. The cheapest car I can buy is a Proto Axia, and you'd expect as a buyer to go as far on a full tank, just about give or take, as someone in a Honda Civic, because those cars have very comparable ranges per tank. Because the Proto Axia doesn't have a big tank, but doesn't actually have a big engine either to consume the fuel. So works about the same. In EVs, not the case at all. So the basic equation with EVs is more range equals bigger battery equals bigger price tag. Like I said, it is the most important and expensive part, the battery, of any EV. But the thing is too, bigger battery means more charging time. And that's another concept that's also quite foreign. It's going to be a sticking point and a point of confusion a lot of car buyers will encounter. Okay? So you have a bigger battery, you paid for it, but you got to wait longer to charge it up. And charging takes time. How much time? That varies between what kind of charger, what kind of car, what kind of... It just depends, man. As an EV user, as an EV buyer, you've got decisions to make, okay? About where to charge, when to charge, and how to charge. So let me explain, just generally, charging. Well, it isn't as straightforward as pumping petrol at the station. There's a lot more waiting involved. For one thing, you will probably need a subscription of some kind, like this one from Charge EV, and expect more players in this space before it stabilizes. So the equation boils down to this: how fast or powerful of a charge can your car take versus how fast or powerful of a charge can the charger offer you. An AC charger like the one we just hooked up the Kona Electric into are slower because they rely on the car's onboard AC to DC converter. And nearly all EVs today have either 11 kilowatt or 22 kilowatt outputs when hooked up to an AC source. This will be the most common form of public charger, but like I said, prepare to wait, and wait some more. DC chargers are much faster since they bypass this conversion step altogether. The newest Tesla superchargers are rated for 250 kilowatts, but I think the fastest one that I've seen so far is 360 kilowatts by a company called ABB. But even that takes time, something like 15 minutes to reach 80%. And that's assuming your car can even handle the full 360 kilowatt DC charging, which is unlikely. And they're more expensive to install and to run, and so there's a higher cost to the end user. At home, you could install a wall box that's essentially another AC charger, but hooked up to your home. Or you could charge even more slowly directly from the socket. So you would have the usual AC charger in public, or to pay for it or whatever. And yeah, in a condo, you've got no choice. You have either a wall box there or you don't, or a socket there or you don't. But if you live in a kaya landed house, then you might have a socket nearby your car, which is great. So you can use one of these things to plug in and recharge slowly. Because with this, it takes 31 hours to recharge the Kona EV in this 64 kilowatt hour configuration. So, depending on how your house is all laid out, it might be easy, or like this, it's a little bit more difficult. There's cables to deal with. Geez, if you're like annoyed at how hard it is to get your cable to charge your phone at night, this is even worse. Oh my God. Okay. Ah. 31 hours later, fully charged car. But yeah, if you live in an apartment or flat, you've much less control over if there's charging facilities built in or not. The dream here is to have a charging station, fast or slow, built into every parking spot, commercial, public, residential, so that you'll always be fully charged, or topped up at least, when you get back into your car. But what about the future? What are we shooting for? Okay? Because right now, we're not where we want to be in terms of EV charging infrastructure, but where do we plan to get? With the government's plan to increase EV adoption, they also want to increase EV charging points, of course. So they plan to put up 10,000 public chargers. I'm guessing they're public, but 10,000 chargers by 2025. That's a lot, okay? Whether they'll achieve this, I have no idea. But the thing is, they're not the only ones. Like Hyundai has committed to making EV chargers more prevalent in their dealerships, just generally everywhere. And the same thing goes for other manufacturers who are making EVs, BMW. They've all committed, Porsche, they've all committed to making chargers more accessible. All this investment to make chargers, to make EVs, to make the infrastructure necessary to make this EV future a thing will cost money. So in the end, someone has to pay for that. Which brings me to a lot of myths about EVs, because eventually everyone's going to be asking questions about EVs, and there's going to be a lot of people giving information that might be slightly or majorly inaccurate. So let me just tackle some common myths about EVs. Firstly, let's talk about price. Are EVs too expensive? And for that, I'll call upon my disembodied voice to explain.
Of course, price. The obvious first question, right? Malaysians always want to know, cheap or not? Remember that EVs generally are still relatively new. And as we get better at making them, the cost will get lower and lower. We've had more than 100 years of making, normal cars. So we're pretty good at that. For EVs, eventually, efficiencies will get better, and so will output, and so will affordability. Supply chain, streamlining, better tech year over year, increased demand, Chinese manufacturers coming into the picture. All these should see prices come down. You can get this Kona EV for at least 150,000 ringgit, fully imported. But what if that was locally assembled? CKD.
Hey voice, you're still there. All right, one more of you to tackle. Are EVs more harmful to make? Okay, the manufacturing process of EVs, are they more harmful than, let's say, making a petrol car or a diesel car? And if that's the case, isn't it kind of useless to tout how green EVs are if they are so polluting to make? Please answer, voice.
So yeah, it is true that EVs have a higher, significantly higher, upfront CO2 and raw material cost, but produces much less carbon and pollutants and emissions over their lifespan. And that will get better if the electricity used to charge them up was also, sustainably generated. And we innovate new battery tech that relies less and less on dirty cobalt and lithium mining, which is unsustainable and just bad for the environment. But any way you spin it, the main draw of the EV is that it's energy agnostic. So maybe we should revisit nuclear energy. Seriously.
All right. Okay. I got you. Cool. I mean, fine, whatever. But answer me this then, voice. What about maintenance? Every car requires maintenance, right? You can't just drive it and it won't wear and tear. Wear and tear is a real thing that affects everything. So what about maintenance? Are EVs more complex to maintain, easier to maintain, more expensive to maintain? What's the deal? Tell me, voice.
Okay, chill bro. Compared to an ICE, an EV has so much fewer moving parts that there isn't much to maintain really. Tires will wear out, lights will burn out, paint will oxidize, but what else? Batteries and their degradation over time are definitely a huge concern, obviously, which is why most manufacturers, in fact all manufacturers, have an extended warranty on them. This Hyundai Kona EV has an 8-year coverage for the battery, which typically is longer or as long as most people will keep their cars.
All right, fine. Final question, final myth, actually, that you might not be able to answer, okay? You think you're so smart, you've been researching this for a long time, it sounds, or at least a little bit, reading up at least a little bit. Are EVs boring? Tell me that, voice.
Well, yeah, depends, but yeah, kind of, okay. So with engines, there's a huge range of sounds and nuances and feelings and sensations. They literally are breathing, beating things, which is why we form these emotional bonds. They're like creatures, pets almost. They rumble and whoosh and roar, and they can leave us in awe when it all comes together in fury. This is also why I think the ICE, the internal combustion engine, will never really die off. But for the majority of drivers, those qualities of an engine are completely ignored. They'd rather want their engines to be as quiet as possible, to recede into the background and not interfere. Just get me from A to B, they'll say. And that's exactly what the EV does, with electric motors, and they're much better at that. Power for the sake of power, torque for torque's sake, acceleration just for bragging rights, If that's as far as your standards go for exciting versus boring, then yeah, I guess EVs are pretty cool.
So, what have you learned over these last few days about EVs and EV ownership, and generally if you should buy an EV in 2022 going forward? Well, okay, we established that EVs definitely are more efficient, no question about that. And as a step forward from internal combustion, which has been going on for like more than 100 years, as a step forward from that, it is our best solution so far. And it has resulted in the most innovative period in automotive history in the last 50 years, just condensed into the last 5 years. And in the next 5 years, it's going to be even more innovation, and that's really, really exciting. But the thing is, combustion, internal combustion cars, ICE, won't just go away, because there's never going to be a point where something just takes over entirely. They can coexist. Some people think that for EVs to win and for the Earth to be a green utopia, that internal combustion has to die entirely. It's just not true. They both can coexist. Things like freight, air travel, those things can't be tackled by electric mobility just yet. So yeah, they can coexist, and I will always own an engine-powered car alongside my eventual EV, because they're just more soulful, they're more characterful, they're just less boring. But for the purposes of driving around, yes, EVs are much more practical and much more usable. Chargers in general will be ubiquitous. Everywhere you park, hopefully, you can charge up your car. And in that world, EVs make so much more sense.